we're back in the car on a Saturday like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your early Saturday evening here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Well, the summer of 1989 is a kind of fabled, iconic movie summer, even if you're not a savant such as myself, and you don't automatically draw conclusions between, okay, well, this year had these movies and that year had those movies. But for someone such as myself, it does. And the summer of 1989 brought an enormous number of not only blockbusters, because every summer is going to have big hit movies, but films that are still talked about now as all-time classics. Not just summer films, but movies which in some ways changed Hollywood, helped to further Hollywood, helped to further, or in some cases, kickstart a franchise. In other times, and in other cases, you just had a movie that was not intended to have sequel money attached, but was just a fantastic one-off box office hit. And in the case of this movie that I'm going to talk about today, which was released on this day, 1989, August 2nd, 1989, it was a film, an ensemble piece with an incredible all-star cast and just a beautifully directed film by Ron Howard, who has done so much great work. And he had done Cocoon earlier in the decade, and he was going to go on to direct what I think is his finest film, Apollo 13, 6 years later. And then 6 years after that, he got the hardware for A Beautiful Mind. But on this day, 1989, Parenthood opened in theaters. And I'm sorry, I teased all of these big movies. Let me give you the rundown of some of the monster films from 1989. You had Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which many people consider to be the best of Spielberg's OG indie trilogy. You had Tim Burton's OG Batman with Jack and Michael Keaton and Kim Basinger and Robert Wall. You had Lethal Weapon 2, which many people think is the best film in that series. You had Timothy Dalton's second and unfortunately final turn as James Bond in License to Kill, a film that many consider to be a top tier, maybe even top 3 James Bond film. It's like a Daniel Craig level grittiness, only even dirtier than a Daniel Craig James Bond. You had Ghostbusters 2 as well. You also had the same Rick Moranis who was in Ghostbusters 2, was in another massive box office hit in the summer of 1989, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. You also, in a more niche-y vein, had Weird Al Yankovic in UHF, a film which kind of tanked at the box office, but is a fucking scream. And you also had one of the great romantic comedies ever made, When Harry Met Sally. I'll have what she's having. I'll have what she's having. Great moments of history. I'll have what she's having. And a generation of men realized that, well, let's just say maybe a woman is not always on the level when it comes to stuff that happens, typically, in the bedroom. But Parenthood, released on this day, 1989, was a significant box office hit. And it takes the form of the kind of TV series, and there was a TV series, Parenthood, but where you have a large extended family, and there's not really usually a main character, but the closest that this movie has to a main character is Steve Martin's character of Gil Buckman. And he has a lot of siblings, and many of them, they have spouses, as is the case with the Harley Jane Kozak character. I always get mixed up. I keep thinking that Rick Moranis plays Steve Martin's brother in this film, but he's his brother-in-law. His name is Nathan Huffner, and Harley Jane Kozak is his sister, I think Susan Buckman. Diane Wiest plays another sister, and Joaquin Phoenix plays Diane Wiest's son, who appears to be he may be involved in some really bad stuff, because he's going through puberty, he's acting very shady and mysterious, and maybe he's getting involved in drugs or who knows what. And the older sister, Diane Wiest's eldest of 2 kids. It's funny, 2 films in 3 years where Diane Wiest plays a lonely widower, cliche though that may be, not widower, excuse me, a lonely divorcee. We're led to believe was in 2 shitty marriages. First, in The Lost Boys, where she ends up in the clutches of Edward Herrmann's friendly neighborhood VHS proprietor, and the Hollywood, the Santa Carla Beach Boardwalk, I forgot exactly, Santa Monica Beach Boardwalk. And in the world of this film, she's a single mom whose best friend, and the way that she satisfies herself is with, in the immortal words of Lawrence Fishburne, these machines. Yes, she uses machines, and it's one of the biggest laughs in the film. But it's not just that Martha Plimpton has a family connection in a weird way with her younger brother in the world of this film, played by Joaquin Phoenix. Joaquin's older brother, the late, great River Phoenix. I mentioned Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. He was in that movie. He plays young Indy. But 3 years before Parenthood, Joaquin Phoenix and the aforementioned Harrison Ford played father and son in Peter Weir's The Mosquito Coast. And Martha Plimpton plays the young woman in that movie whose family meets Harrison Ford's family. Harrison plays a guy named Ali Fox, kind of a bohemian sort of guy, a forward thinker who slowly goes insane in the Amazon rainforest or jungle. You know, you're waiting for Werner Herzog and Klaus Kinski. But in The Mosquito Coast, character played by Martha Plimpton meets River Phoenix, Joaquin's older brother, and has a crush on him. And she's maybe not that great at expressing a crush, expressing herself. So instead of saying, hey, I think you're hot, I think you're cute, she instead says, I think about you when I go to the bathroom. And I would say that of all of the weirdo moments that would have audiences screaming now if they actually watched it, Martha Plimpton with a straight face telling River Phoenix that she thinks about him when she goes to the bathroom. I mean, that is gold. In Parenthood, though, her boyfriend is played by an actor that you all know. The boyfriend is played by Keanu Reeves, who was just getting going. He'd already been in a couple of big movies. He was in River's Edge, which was a phenomenal film with the always fire, and it was a big year for him, Dennis Hopper. In 1986, Dennis Hopper had River's Edge, Hoosiers, and Don't You Fucking Look at Me! Frank Booth in Blue Velvet. And the Academy fucked up. They nominated him for Hoosiers when he should have won the award for Blue Velvet. But the Joaquin Phoenix character in Parenthood is very mysterious and shady, and Diane Wiest as the single mom who's horny but she don't need no man. She's horny, there is no man. All there are machines for her at this point in her life. She's freaking out. She doesn't know what to do about her son. And luckily, Martha Plimpton's boyfriend's soon-to-be husband, now they're kids and they go on and get married. Maybe he has the answer. Maybe his name is Todd, and it's always funny every time Diane Wiest, she doesn't just say, there's Todd, or that's my daughter's boyfriend, that's my daughter's husband. She always refers to him as that Todd. It's an insult. It's a crack at him. He's not just Todd, he's that Todd. Just to hear Diane Wiest say that Todd is worth the price of admission. So this is a story where all of the individual central characters have their own crises and own triumphs in the world of the story. But as I mentioned before, I lost it and forgot where I was going with the first point. Again, a million colliding thoughts, this is what you get. But Steve Martin's Gil Buckman is the closest we have to a central character. And, you know, Steve Martin was playing younger again. It's funny, I talked about Wilford Brimley, who I loved, and how many different roles where he played older. Well, Steve, because his hair started to go gray, relatively speaking, at a young age, Steve played younger a lot. Now, if you just drop into this, if you know Steve Martin, let's say, from Only Murders in This Building, oh, that's the old dude with Selena, whatever, it's fine, no judgment. But if you just dropped into this movie and nobody told you what year it was, and you said, that's the guy from Only Murders, you'd say he looks about 15 years younger. How old do you think he is? I don't know, maybe he's in his mid-50s here. Maybe he's in his mid-50s. Well, Steve is playing a guy who I think is supposed to be less than 40. In real life, he was 43, but he can't pass for a guy in his 30s. He just can't. And he's supposed to be a young father on the rise professionally when he looks like a guy who should be calculating his IRA and wondering how many years he has left until he retires. But Steve's character is the level-headed one. And, you know, for somebody who came on the scene who was this crazy stand-up comic, I mean, you can arguably say that Steve Martin's stand-up was even more out there than Robin Williams, or even more out there in some ways than George Carlin. Steve Martin did shit that nobody had even thought of before. He was completely insane. So for that guy to play the kind of straight-laced good dad, trying to be a better dad and a better husband and a better provider, he's not somebody that you would have in the 70s imagined playing this sort of role. You would have imagined him playing a decade earlier the role that Keanu Reeves takes in this film of that Todd. But an actor I mentioned a few weeks back during the Best Movie You've Never Seen series. The film is Max Dugan Returns, a movie starring Marsha Mason and Matthew Broderick and the man who I'm about to mention, Jason Robards. Jason Robards is the sort of actor that if he's unknown to, let's say, a younger person or somebody under 40 even, it's difficult to explain why he was so good, why he had such gravitas, and why his line readings, which weren't always necessarily that impressive, but he had a way of delivering lines, and just, he had a perfect face for the movies where everything he said, it seemed more important than it maybe even was. And that's something you can't teach and you can't put in a bottle. But Robards was a great actor and he had incredible screen presence. So in this film, he plays the patriarch. He plays the father of Steve Martin, Harley Jane Kozak, Diane Wiest, and the wayward son, the youngest. Man, I don't remember the name of the character. That's so weird. But Tom Hulse, an Oscar nominee himself for lead actor for Amadeus 5 years earlier. He plays the wayward son. And it's the kind of thing that the character and the dynamic is what I'm going for. It's the sort of thing where even if you haven't lived something like this, even if your family has not dealt with what I'm about to tell you, it feels real and you know somebody where this took place for sure. So Tom Hulse returns home, and all of the different characters. Rick Moranis is married to Harley Jane Kozak. They have a son who he is training to be a super achiever. The kid seems to have a very high IQ, and he's doing drills like he's basically in school all day. He's doing so much extracurricular stuff, and Harley Jane just wants the kid to have a normal childhood and not be a super achiever. We don't need the kid to go to Harvard when he's 15. I want him to play baseball. I want him to play kickball. He doesn't have to use his brain 100% of the time. So characters live, obviously, they have their own homes, their own lives. But a lot of the big scenes in the movie take place at the house of the patriarch, Jason Robards' character. You know, father, grandfather, and potentially at some point, great-grandfather. So Tom Hulse, the prodigal son, who is clearly the favored child, and there is a little bit of resentment in the Steve Martin character in particular. You don't get this from either Diane Wiest or Harley Jane Kozak's character, but you get it from Steve, which is that Steve's character of Gil, he has given his best to his family, to his extended family, and he's working hard to try to provide for his wife and his kids. And Mary Steenburgen is very, very good. She's an actress also, a little kind of go hot and cold depending on the role. But in this movie, she's perfectly cast and she has some great moments of comedy. She's not really known as a comic actress, but I won't spoil it, but she has a specific moment where it is a scream, in part because it's her, somebody who's not known for comedy, and man, does she deliver. Yeah, that's what she said. But Steve Martin carries around a certain kind of resentment for the relationship that his younger brother has had with the father. And Tom Hulse returns from we don't know what. And what we get out of him is, it's not that he's unintelligent. It's that he's always looking for the easy way out. He doesn't really want to buckle down, and he's had multiple opportunities to go to work for Robard's business, which I don't remember what he does, but we're led to believe he's been very successful. Like he's a small business owner and has been able to provide for his family and probably put money aside for the grandkids. Like this is a guy who is very serious. You know, in the movie that I mentioned from a couple of weeks ago, Max Dugan Returns, if I didn't repeat that, his character is very shady and he's basically a snake, but he feels like he's doing it for the right reason because he wants to leave something also for his daughter, who he has been estranged from, and his grandson, who he really doesn't know. But this guy in this movie, Frank Buckman, is a serious individual, a successful business owner, and the wayward son, Tom Hulse, has had every opportunity to join and just, he doesn't want to do it. He wants to keep fucking up on his own and having somebody bail him out. And it just gets under, you could see that it bothers Gil Buckman that he's busting his ass. And his father has not said, you know, Gil, I appreciate what you're doing to try to provide, and I got a little extra money, here's 10th. No. And Steve doesn't verbalize this as Gil, but this is what we get after seeing the film. We understand he feels resentment, didn't have the closest relationship, and he also feels as if his dad doesn't respect him. And that is really a tough thing that so many people can identify with. Just the thought of that is very, very, it's troublesome. It hurts, even thinking of it. So all of these disparate plot elements, Diane Weiss, the single mom, dealing with her son, Joaquin's character, maybe going off the deep end and getting involved with drugs or gangs, the daughter being with a guy that she doesn't like, then marrying him, spoiler alert, holy shit, what the fuck are you marrying that Todd for? And what's going to happen with the son? But Keanu Reeves is so likable as that Todd. If you ever want somebody who only knows older era, they only know Keanu from John Wick, let's say, they don't even know The Matrix. You want to understand why Keanu became a star. You can point to, you could show him Point Break. You could show him some of the films from the 90s like Speed. But if you show them Parenthood, they're going to like the movie because this is a movie that is timeless because it's not dependent on technology to deliver the goods story-wise. But you show them this movie and you see how Keanu takes a character that is not very interesting on the page. If I would argue that the character of Todd is dead on the page, which means there's no there. This is a one-dimensional character who's mostly played for laughs. By sheer force of his charisma and personality, Keanu makes the character memorable. And he's probably the most likable person in the entire movie. He has an open heart, and his default setting is kindness. He doesn't have to say it. And, we know about Keanu, he might be the most likable major star to ever work in Hollywood. He's up there with Paul Newman and Audrey Hepburn. Nobody has ever said anything bad about Keanu. He seems like exactly what he is. He's had a lot of tragedy in his life, as many of you know, but he's a prince of a guy. And that Todd, despite the fact that his future mother-in-law, or maybe his mother-in-law, thinks he's a clown, he is a good person and he will do right by the daughter. And he also will talk to Joaquin's angst-ridden, scared, potentially dangerous all of a sudden 12-year-old, 13-year-old boy going through puberty and not having a good time of it. So Gil Buckman, Steve Martin's protagonist, again, the closest we have to a protagonist, his particular crisis is that his son, Kevin, I think it's the youngest, but it might be the middle. Like, they had 3 kids, I believe, and then there might be a 4th. But the son is quite clear a neurodivergent. And if this were today, the son would have already been, like, it would be a different angle in the movie. We would know that the kid is on the autism spectrum. Now, I can look at this kid and know that's me. But I had better aptitudes. This kid is struggling in more areas. He can't interact properly. He gets irrationally frustrated over things that are not important. But also, he's not a very good athlete. See, at least in my case, I couldn't get along with anybody. I stared at the ground. I spoke too quickly in certain situations, but I could play sports. My personality issues, my autistic tendencies, my spectrum issues did not translate. Thank goodness I was able to play sports. On a baseball field, I always knew what to do. Always knew where to go. Step on that. That's an unassisted double play, that kind of thing. But this kid is in worse shape. He has not had any conditioning, it doesn't appear. He has not been in therapy, and therapy is expensive. If my dear old dad were here, he would tell you. Jeremy's therapy cost a lot of money, but he never complained. My old man never complained. He didn't have to. He wasn't hurting for cash. But it's not cheap to get the right kind of therapy. If you want to call it behavior modification, that's not really what it is. But putting people into situations that is supposed to freak them out because of their wiring and gradually making them feel less and less scared. And so the character of Kevin does start to go to therapy, even though Steve almost half jokingly says, I guess I'll have to get another job. Bro, you're working 50 to 60 hours a week to dazzle Dave, his boss. He's trying to dazzle him. You shouldn't have to do anything else. But the son slowly starts to improve. It's just incremental. And this is something that I identify with. Rome wasn't built in a day, and somebody who struggles with normal social interaction does not turn into Don Juan overnight. They're not turning into Don Juan, period. But if you put yourself into frightening situations, if you just dip your toe into it, and then 2 toes, and then a whole foot, eventually you will function in more or less the way that other people do. So that angle, it takes up a lot of, not so much screen time, but the consternation of trying to throw the best possible birthday party for his son who struggles to make friends. And the way Steve pulls that off, it's pure Steve Martin. Steve Martin was not only a funny guy, just a natural comedian, and brilliant and inventive and creative, but he could play drama, but he also could do character comedy. He could do physical comedy. He could make himself look ridiculous, and he wasn't afraid to look stupid. And he pulls off the son's birthday party in this movie in a way that we don't expect, and it's just marvelous. His performance, it's easy to overlook in this film, just as it's easy to overlook in 2 years prior when he sadly is pretty much acted off the screen by John Candy, who steals planes, trains, and automobiles whole cloth. But he does have the more interesting character to play. But there is a moment in this film. There are 2 extraordinary moments, I will say. Both with the elder people in the film. And the grandma is still around. The grandmother, not like Steve Martin's grandma, is still around. And they think that she does not know which end is up, that she's this doddering old lady, until she talks about why she would have wanted to go on a roller coaster instead of just the Ferris wheel, because the Ferris wheel moves so slowly. It doesn't really do anything. But the roller coaster is constantly in motion, and it can be terrifying but also exhilarating. And she basically equates it to life. That the ups and downs, the bumps, the bruises, the peaks and valleys, that's what we're here for. And Mary Steenburgen basically says to her husband, Gil, Steve's character, your grandma's a really wise woman. And then Steve like he was almost being dismissive of her and says, yeah, how come she's sitting in our neighbor's car? You know, it's like he's got to throw that out there. That's pure Steve Martin. But Robards is given 2 moments in this film, 2 moments to shine. And one is pivotal to the story because Gil Buckman has gone most of his life thinking no matter what he did, he was going to disappoint his father. His father doesn't respect him. His father thinks he's a schmuck. And it grates on him. He's questioning, am I even a good father? I'm not a good enough provider. Starts asking the big questions, right? Existential crisis right here. But Tom Hulse, as the wayward son, is causing more and more stress for Frank Buckman. And he goes to his son Gil for advice. And he doesn't just go to him for advice, for parenting advice. He tells him, you're a wonderful father, Gil. And the look on Steve Martin's face when he realizes that his father has respected him all along. He was completely off base, thinking his dad didn't respect him. It's the kind of old school mindset where Frank Buckman just didn't show affection in a conventional way. He thought that Father didn't give a shit about me. He doesn't respect me at all. He thinks I'm a moron. No, I'm asking you, Gil, because you're a wonderful father. He doesn't even say, I think you're a wonderful father. He just throws it at him. And he's just trying to not even connect. He's trying to get some answers. What do I do with my son? What do I do with your brother? And then Steve kind of poo-poos it. Well, maybe I'm not doing so great because you look at Kevin and he's struggling. But the old man knows exactly what he's talking about. The old man gets it. You're a good father. And what do you think I ought to do? And they have a real wonderful conversation. Two terrific performers, matching each other's energy. And then Robards gets one more, almost a capper, even though he worked for another decade. It feels like a capper to his career where, and this isn't really much of a spoiler, he becomes a great grandfather. And a moment of Jason Robards lighting a cigar and puffing on a cigar, which normally I wouldn't recommend, but it is a top tier movie moment, especially if you know the kind of performer, the legend, 2-time Oscar winner, Jason Robards. It's like he earned the cigar with the rest of his career. And that's why his character gets that moment to just celebrate a little, even though everything isn't great, because Tom Hulce's character is he's a fuck up. And, there are some people, and we know this, again, the movie is telling a specific story, but there are so many different facets of this film that we take from and can say, yes, something similar happened to me or happened to my sister or my uncle, whatever it might be. But there are some people who, when they appear to be at the end of their rope and are offered one final lifeline, will jump on it. They will take it and they will go as far with it as they possibly can. But in the world of this film, the wayward son is offered one final lifeline. He's a degenerate gambler and he owes a lot of bad people a lot of money. And Frank Buckman, as the father, knows his son is a fuck up, even if he was the favorite child. He said, listen, kid, I can get you out of this mess. Okay? I can get you out of this mess. I have enough money. I can do it. But there's a string attached. If I help you here, if I help you settle this once and for all, I want you to come to work for me and work with me, and I will teach you this business. And then you can take it over and you can make a life for yourself. What do you say? Well, he agrees, but he agrees with a caveat. A buddy of mine just called. I got to go and check this out. And then when I come back, we will put the Frank Buckman plan into action. And as much as it pains him to say, I forgot to even bring up that he has a son named Cool. And that is kind of a funny moment between Steve Martin and Rick Moranis, where the kid Tom Hulce says, this is my son, Cool. And Rick Moranis goes, did he say cool? Steve Martin goes, cool. Just like that. So he's been living, the grandson, the son of Tom Hulce, has been living there. And he has a conversation, Jason Robards, with the kid. And for stretches of the film, he seems like he really wasn't interested in interacting with his grandson. But as the story goes forth, he kind of gets more and more into grandparenting. So he has a heart-to-heart with this little boy. He can't be more than 7 or 8 years old. He says, your father's going away. He's going away. Is he coming back? No, he's not. But you are welcome to stay here. You are my grandson. And if you want to stay here, there's a home for you. Another really good moment for Robards. And, this is the sort of film that gets into so many different aspects of parenting, of family, of real life stuff, whether it's 2025 or whether it's 1989. This is kind of what you'd like to have a round table of people discussing not only their experiences with the film, but how many different parts of the movie spoke to them personally because they went through something similar or they went through the exact same situation. So I think that this movie, because it was a Paramount film, I'm pretty sure it's on Paramount Plus. It's been on Netflix. I didn't check, but my guess is you can find it free on streaming on more than one platform. This is one of those movies that got great reviews, was a huge box office hit, but I feel like people finding it now for the first time, even with what I just said, they'll still be surprised with just how good this movie is, how colorful and engaging all of the characters are. The performances are wonderful. The Rick Moranis, Harley Jane Kozak marriage is funny. Their marriage almost comes apart because Rick's character of Nathan is so gung-ho about making his son a super achiever that he can't see the forest for the trees. And at the end of the summer of Rick Moranis, as I said, having Ghostbusters, Parenthood, and Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Rick Moranis gets a moment for himself, which is his moment to shine, where he sings a love song to Harley Jane Kozak, asking her to give him another chance, and maybe I don't have to be such an asshole when it comes to parenting our son. Parenthood, directed by Ron Howard, released on this day, 1989, and starring, let me see how many I can remember, Steve Martin, Jason Robards, Keanu Reeves, Joaquin Phoenix, Jason Robards, Martha Plimpton, Rick Moranis, Harley Jane Kozak. Wow. Yeah, I always blank out on all the names. I should have these things. Oh, I have so many names. There's a lot of names in the world of this film. And Tom Hulse as the wayward son. This has been episode 590 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your Saturday evening here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.